Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. My guest today is Danny Hodge. Danny, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. There are a lot of ways that I could introduce you, but as is typical on this podcast, I like to let my guests do their own introduction. So in 30 seconds or less, tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do.
I'm Danny Hodge, and I currently run and own a startup coffee shop. Started about a year ago, and it's always been a dream of mine, and so I'm living a dream right now.
So 23 years old, and you said this has kind of been something that you've wanted to do as long as you can remember. Like, is that your story? Like and was it specifically always coffee, or you just always kind of wanted to start a business and grew into coffee as kind of the vehicle? Or talk a little bit about how you got from, as a young man, having this vision and this dream, this idea, to where you are now, kind of like you're actually doing it.
Yeah, this wasn't a dream until I was probably around 18, 19.
Okay.
And so I never thought I would start a business growing up, like as a kid.
Okay.
I thought that was something I would never actually want to do. That sounded horrible to me. But then I was 18, I think, and I started working at a coffee shop. And I thought it was just the greatest thing ever. I love the community. I love coffee. And I love that it brought people together. And I thought, like, how can I do this for the rest of my life? And so I was like, well, I think the only option is like to start a coffee shop. You can't just work as a barista your whole life. I mean, you could, but that didn't sound that appealing. And so I wanted to create my own atmosphere and community by starting my own business. And so I continued working in coffee with that as a goal. So trying to learn everything I could. If somebody asked me to take on a new role, I just said yes, no matter whether I could do it or not. But that was how I decided to learn. So I think it was 3 or 4 years after starting working at that coffee shop, was able to start working on my own dream and putting it together and starting my own coffee shop.
So you guys have been you've been live with your coffee shop, which, by the way, what's the name of your business, Danny? I don't think you said that in the intro.
I didn't. It's called Paix Coffee. It's spelled Paix, and it means peace in French, which really embodies our goal and the vision for the business.
I love the way you tell your story. Like you said, you had this idea and you said kind of 18, 19, like, so entering into adulthood,
yeah.
You're working at a coffee shop and you think, man, there's so much that I love about this atmosphere, this work, like this whole deal. But you kind of look at the longer term trajectory and think, well, maybe I don't want to just be a barista forever. There's nothing wrong with that. But for you, that was not the path you wanted to take. And so, you didn't just jump right in and say, okay, I'm going to quit my job and go start my own thing. I love how you talked about, like, there was a new opportunity, there was something new to learn, and you just kind of said yes and went for it and learned on the job. So I'm curious, like, what are some examples in your specific case where maybe you didn't have all the tools or all the knowledge, but you got an opportunity to start something new and you jumped into it? Can you talk about, like, kind of what that was, like one of those examples of something that you did that maybe you weren't quite ready for, but wanted to learn?
Man, there's so many, because when you're like 18, you basically know nothing.
Right.
And so the biggest one was definitely, I had worked in coffee for less than a year, and I had expressed how much I was interested in it, how much I liked coffee, and how I wanted to learn as much as I could. And the owner of the coffee shop I was working at wanted to teach me how to roast.
Okay.
And that's like a whole new thing in coffee. Like, you could know as much as you want to about coffee, and if you haven't learned how to roast, like, that's just a whole nother thing. So I was like kind of scared, because it was like, this is something I've never done before. I'm going to be roasting all the coffee that gets served to hundreds of people every day. And so I knew I wanted to say yes to it and learn, because that's like a huge opportunity. But I was definitely scared. And that was something that definitely created a new desire inside of the coffee scene. Our business now is very much focused on, we want to start roasting. And if I hadn't learned how to roast back then, it would be a lot harder to start a roastery now. So that was huge.
So can you talk a little bit about, for people like me, so like I drink coffee. I've had your product and I really enjoy it, but I'm not, I wouldn't consider myself like a coffee expert. So can you talk a little bit, like in just kind of simple terms, like what is that process like of roasting? Like what all goes into it? And like, I'm sure there's kind of like a scientific formula that makes a really good cup of coffee. Like, can you talk just, again, like layman's terms, high level, like describe that process a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of variables that you have to control as a roaster while you're basically cooking the coffee. It starts off looking kind of like a pale green, ends up looking like your brown bean that you're used to. And in that process, the rate at which the temperature increases and how the airflow is and how long the roast is, all of those things impact the taste of the coffee. And so it's pretty hard to control those things. And not only is it important to control them super consistently, batch to batch, but also changing those to make the coffee taste different and taste better. And so you might run a batch of coffee through and it could taste bad, and you have to know what to change, whether it's the way that you're heating the coffee up or all those other variables. So
there's a lot.
And there's there's a whole lot of other stuff behind there with consistency and everything. But yeah, there's a lot.
So there's a lot. So it's interesting. You talk about like you might go through and roast a batch and then realize like, oh, this isn't quite right. But there's tons of variables that you can change, and you have to kind of be able to know like, okay, this I need to turn the volume up on this specific thing versus something else. So that's so for something like that, and I'm sure it's one of those things where like maybe you never master it. You're always learning new techniques and new things. But like, how long did it take you to go from I have no knowledge at all of how to roast to like feeling like you're pretty competent and you've developed a skill set there? Was that like a year, 3 years? Like how long does it take to get to that point for you?
I think it took me about a year till I would say I was roasting good coffee.
Okay.
Now, throughout that year, I thought I was roasting good coffee. Sometimes.
Sometimes
I knew it was bad.
All right. So how did you know, like you thought it was good, but how did you find, like, did people give you that feedback, or like, how did you realize like, no, this isn't good?
It's definitely, as I was learning, I was like, oh yeah, that coffee I roasted 2 months ago, like that was not that good.
So as you're discovering like the really good stuff, then you realize like that old stuff wasn't quite that good.
As you get better and better, you taste coffee and you're like, okay, this is a lot better than it was a month ago.
Yeah.
And I worked with some other roasters and they taught me things. So I was like, okay, I was roasting pretty poorly before I learned these things. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So is there, you talked a little bit about in your intro about kind of what one of the things that you fell in love with when it comes to like the whole coffee world is the community aspect of it. And you just touched on community again, talking about kind of connecting with other roasters. And like, so I'm curious, like, is there a big like coffee roasting scene in Richmond where we live, or is this like a big network that's like all across the country? Or like talk a little bit about like what that even looks like for somebody like me who's ignorant of it, and B, how you got connected to some of these folks.
Yeah, I think originally the community I was drawn in by was the community of the actual local coffee shop and the people that came. But there is definitely a pretty substantial coffee community in Richmond, less so in Charlottesville, which is where I originally started roasting and working. But I mean, Richmond is just bigger, so there's a lot more coffee in here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like community events that are brought together, like with latte art competitions, fun things like that, where you meet a lot of other baristas and other roasters. That's the only thing that I've done where I've actually met a lot of other than just working and them coming to the shop. But that's the only place that I've met like the majority of coffee people in Richmond.
Okay.
There are expos that you can go to, like big events.
So you're just literally like, you're just doing your thing. You're meeting people as they come into your shop, and you're going to these kind of like networking type events, and you're just meeting people and kind of making those connections. Kind of it sounds like organically, naturally.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And over the course of like a decent amount of time, right? Like it's not like you just go to one thing and now you've built out your whole network.
Yeah.
Okay. So One of the things that I'm really curious about to hear from you. So you have this vision, this idea that you catch when you're, before you're even in your 20s, really, like, this is kind of the direction you go. You start doing the work, you start kind of learning the trade, learning the skills, recognizing like where you need to learn and grow. And then there comes a point in your career where you realize like, okay, now is the time for me to launch out and start my own thing. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about like that process, and then how, was there a specific event, or like, how did you get to the point where you knew, okay, the time is right, I'm going to go for it? Like, how did you get there?
It was a total God thing. I always knew it was going to be really scary to start something, and I imagined it was going to be a lot scarier than it was. So we moved to Richmond, me and my wife, Erin, and in 2021, I started working at a coffee shop here in Richmond called Barista, and just started working there. And I always knew I would probably need a business partner. I thought that was a good idea, and it would be a lot more fun to start with somebody else. I don't know why I thought I needed a business partner, but I was definitely right, looking back on it. And so I was kind of looking, like, anytime I met somebody new that was pretty into coffee, I would like ask, like, have you ever thought about starting a coffee shop? Kind of scope it out, see if they were somebody that I would want to start something with. And I worked at Roastology for a while, hadn't met anybody that seemed like the right person. And then I think it was a year and a half, almost 2 years into working there, I met this guy, Seth. It was kind of interesting because I was away for like a trip for a week, and the manager of the coffee shop, I had interviewed a couple people, and I get back and he's like, yeah, I interviewed this guy. He is really into coffee, and he reminds me a lot of you. Like, you guys both are into the same thing. Like, he asked about the equipment, like all of the stuff. And he was also like, and I think he can't work on Sundays. And I was like, ooh, that's a good thing, because he probably is going to church on Sundays, which was pretty much like a necessity for a business partner. Like, I knew they needed to be a Christian, so we had the same goals, values, and all that stuff. And yeah, and then I met him, and like right off the bat, we were like, we wanted to do the exact same thing. We were just like making conversation. He's like, yeah, I wanted to start like a coffee cart maybe, and then turn it into a roastery. And I was like, no way, I kind of wanted to do the same thing. And within like, I think it was with 3 weeks, we had decided to do this thing together. Of meeting each other. We'd met each other 3 weeks ago and had just talked a lot. And it was just like clear to me that he was the right person to start the business with. But I wasn't imagining I would be starting a business that early. I was always looking for the person that I would probably want to start with, but I wasn't really sure that I wanted to start right away. I was still scared. I didn't know what that would look like, but he was really ready to start right away. So I was like, okay. Let's just go for it. And
so that's awesome.
And Erin, my wife, was all in for it too. Yeah.
That's really cool. So you talked about, so I'm glad you introduced kind of the faith element. So you and I know each other from church. We're part of the same small group. And I love that, like, you talked earlier about you're part of your mission in the name of your company, and how, like, all of that. And then you talked about how important it was to have someone who, when you're looking at a business partner, they got to have the same passion. They have to have the same interest, right? Like asking the right questions about the roasting process and all that. But really what seems to kind of underpin all of that, and really before maybe some of that other technical stuff, is you wanted to have a business partner who is also a Christian, right? So talk a little bit about that aspect of it, because that may be something that, some people will resonate with and others might not. Why is that such an important core of what you guys are doing with Paix?
Our main focus is to connect with the people in Richmond, whether that's with businesses that we're partnering with or customers. We want to be a light to the people around us. And so if I was just doing this with some other guy that didn't have that same goal, we probably wouldn't name it the same thing. It probably wouldn't, we probably wouldn't be, well, we're closed on Sundays, which is a day that we could be very busy, I'll say. And we're purposely closed because we both want to go to church. And I think we'll always be closed, even when we have staff who may not go to church. We'll still be closed on Sunday because we want to be able to invite them to church. And if they're working, you can't really invite them to church. And so all of those things, I mean, that doesn't even scratch the surface of how important it is that we're both Christians, because I mean, there's even talking to each other about like our life. Like if we had such different worldviews, it would really impact the whole partnership.
Yeah,
and
for
trust.
sure.
I have a lot more trust in Seth because he's a Christian and he has some strong morals. And not to say that Christians are perfect at all, but there is a little bit more trust there.
I think that makes a lot of sense, man. I mean, so, you know, as a Christian myself, we, you know, that's such a big part of our identity, right? Like who we are, the way we think about, you know, any kind of decision that we make, you know, ideally it's always being filtered through the lens of how do I honor Jesus with this decision, with this, you know, business venture, with this, et cetera. And so just having that kind of alignment with the guy that you're working with day in, day out, I think probably makes things a lot smoother. And that's not to say that you guys don't have, you know, I'm sure you have disagreements and challenges that you run into, but at the end of the day, you're truing back to that kind of core identity that you both share. And that I think probably just makes things run a lot more smoothly. That's great, man. So I'm interested in something that you kind of snuck in there along the way in your last answer was about the kind of the launch approach, the way that you guys started. So it sounds like you have been kind of talking to people, praying for like who's the right person to join and do this business with. And then Seth comes along. He's maybe a little bit further along in terms of readiness than you are. And that kind of launched you guys into it. But you didn't start with, you know, a big brick and mortar store. So you guys started doing the cart for a season and now you're in the space that you're in now. So talk a little bit about kind of that thought process and why you decided to do it that way versus maybe going a different route.
Yeah. So from learning by working with other coffee shops and working in them, we had both watched a lot of them fail or struggle. Like not necessarily all of them failed, but it's usually pretty difficult to make substantial money by selling $3 to $6 coffees. You have to sell a lot of them to cover overhead, especially if your spot that you're renting costs, you know, $5,000 a month, which is what the first coffee shop I worked for paid. And also staff. Like it's just a lot to cover all that with just selling, you know, $5. You have to sell a lot of $5 coffee basically. Sure. So we knew that we wanted to start smart, and the coffee cart was not only no overhead, but it also was a low startup cost. So we didn't have to take out a big loan, which were at the time like going to be like 30%. So because this was I guess the end of 2022. So we decided to go with the cart. Seth got a small loan from his parents, which with 0% interest. And then I had some savings that I was able to put into it. So, and then we had zero overhead.
That's awesome.
So we were able to start a little slow. We could do like 1 or 2 days a week while we worked at our other job, which they were kind enough to let us continue working at their coffee shop while we started a competing coffee business. Oh,
that's awesome, man.
So that's why we started with that. But it ended up being, looking back, the cart stands out so much from any other coffee thing in Richmond. And so we were able to go out onto like busy streets on like corners where a coffee shop couldn't go because a brick and mortar on the side of this busy corner. And we were able to go out there and hundreds of people saw us every day. Whether they bought something or not, they drove by us like on their way to work or wherever they were going. And so it was a really great way. It was kind of like a billboard basically. While we were also selling coffee. So I would not change. I wouldn't change anything with how we started it. It's definitely difficult doing the cart because you have to unload it and load it every day. It's not easy. I wouldn't try to do that for years and years, but for that small season, that worked out really well for us.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to get started, especially when you talk about like the overhead costs and the startup costs. Like it's not a ton, and you're able to just do what you guys want to do, which is sell coffee and connect in the community. So how long has it been? You did the cart for a season. So you started that at the end of 22 and then recently moved into the space that you're in now, right? Like when did you guys land where you are now?
We first found this space when we were doing a pop-up with a vintage store, and their store, the building they're in, that they rent the whole building. And then there's a smaller side of it that they were using as a salon. So they rented out a few chairs. And they were, I think, just planning to move on from the salon or they were thinking about it. And we ended up talking with them, and they thought it'd be cool if we put a coffee shop in here. And so we were like, well, we weren't really planning on doing a coffee shop this early on, but it seemed like the perfect opportunity. And we were also able to start roasting, which was from the get-go. That was our main goal.
Oh, that's super exciting.
That's how we found this space.
That's so cool, man. So I love the way like even so, when you go to your first initial launch, and even when you go to the brick and mortar, it sounds like in both cases, like you, Danny, maybe didn't feel like you were ready for it, but the connections you were making, the circumstances around you kind of indicated otherwise. Like, hey, this is the time, like, let's do it. And it seems like you've just kind of been following that. And, I just think that's amazing that, like, even though you maybe didn't feel as confident as you wanted to, you were just kind of getting these nudges that, like, no, now's the time, go do the next thing. And you guys have done that. I think that's so cool, man. So you've also, you've talked about the cart and the nature of kind of being able to access places that maybe a larger place can't be. Has that been one of the keys to your success in terms of, because, like, I can't go anywhere in Richmond without people talking about Paix. Like, people know you guys, people like you guys. Like, did you have like a marketing strategy on social media, or like what would you attribute the early success that you guys have had to, like, in terms of like just brand recognition and kind of getting the word out about Paix?
Yeah, I feel like we kind of got lucky, in a way, or I would say God, had some plans that we didn't know were going to work so well. But I think the cart being unique and standing out, and we have a neon sign on the front, so it really, like, makes a difference when you're driving by and you see this bright neon sign, and you look at it and then you look it up, like, it's got our name on it. So that definitely had a big part of it. But also, we're pretty much, with our social media, we like to just do things that we think are cool. And apparently people also think they're cool. So that's been working for us. And also, I think there's like a desire for excellence that we have when it comes to serving our coffee. And also, just really anything we're serving, we're doing, we want to do it at the highest level. Yeah. And I think people really appreciate that.
I love that. So you, and I can vouch, like, having been a customer of yours, like, I can vouch for the product. That's great. And you guys, obviously you guys are great guys. Wow. Really thankful for you coming on today. I have a couple questions as we kind of close things here. So the first is, you have, it sounds like you had a lot of doors open, a lot of cool opportunities to get to where you are, but you've also faced some challenges along the way too, I'm sure, right? Like, you and I, since we know each other personally, I've kind of been able to hear a little bit about that. But, like, how do you handle the adversity and the challenge? Because I think a lot of people have in their mind, like, I've got this goal, I've got this vision, this thing I want to do. And for some people, it's, I want to write a book, or I want to start a podcast, or maybe they want to do a business like Paix. And they think, like, okay, I'm just going to start and do the work, and then I'm going to see the result. And it doesn't always happen that quickly or that linearly. So when you face those kind of setbacks or those challenges, how do you, as a business owner, approach that?
I think the main thing, so we've faced probably a number of pretty substantial hurdles. And one thing I always know is that God's in control, and that he has his hand on us. So whether it's something that is, like, going to take a long time to get through or not, it's kind of a very comforting thing to remind myself that God's in control. And then secondly, I've always thought, like, you can't judge what is going on in the time, or, like, in the moment, on how well your business is doing, or your book or whatever. Like, we'll have some really slow weeks, and if you just, like, oh wow, this is going to be how it's going to be, and we're going to fail, like.
So Danny, I was just about to ask you about challenges that you guys have faced, and just kind of in general, how you navigate challenges and problems and hurdles that you run into. And it was right around that time when we started experiencing some technical difficulties. I think your AirPods died, and then we had this crazy echo. So we are actually, this is about a month later, we're going to finish up this interview. And I'll start off with that question. Like, what challenges have you guys faced as you started up and kind of just getting into your physical space and all that? Like, how do you, so talk about some specific challenges maybe if you want, and then in general, how you think about navigating through hurdles and roadblocks and challenges along the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's always challenges. Pretty much everything we've done, we're doing for the first time. So you live and you learn, like, you never get it right the first time. There's definitely been, I think the hardest thing is just trying to navigate all the laws around, especially as we've opened up the cafe, just trying to figure out all the zoning and permits and all that stuff. So that's been the biggest challenge for sure. And I think in terms of mindset around that, like we know there's going to be challenges. And I think the first 5 or 6 months, we felt like there weren't a lot. Everything was kind of going well. We were like, all right, something's going to show up and we're going to have something go wrong. We know it. And we're just going to push through. So we weren't taken off guard too much. There's been a number of things. We've had a stolen trailer. We had, we got shut down from the city, lots of things that happened, but things have also worked out. So we have to always trust God, knowing that He's in control, and that if you can't control it, then no point in worrying about it. So that's kind of the mindset.
That's a really good perspective. So one of the things that I talk a lot about on this podcast is encouragement. I think that's, there's so many people out there who have an idea of maybe a business they want to start or something they want to do. And so many people don't do it. And I think there's lots of reasons maybe, but I think one of the big reasons maybe is they don't have the right encouragement, or they haven't they don't have someone in their corner kind of cheering them on, helping them out, giving them advice. So I'm curious, from your perspective, has that been something that's kind of played a role with you? And can you think of like something specific that maybe someone said to you or an interaction that you've had that's just kind of helped encourage you and keep you going?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest thing was really early on, years before I ever started this. I was going to school to be a nurse, and I was doing it because I was supposed to go to college. I was supposed to figure out my career, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I liked science and anatomy and stuff like that. And I knew nursing was a pretty stable job. There's always going to be a job. So I was just doing it. And I think it was first or second semester, my parents were like, you should shadow a nurse. And I was never really interested that much. And my parents saw that and they realized, and I was getting into coffee at the time too. And they sat me down and they were like, are you sure you want to be a nurse? Are you sure you want to go to college? And I was like, you mean I don't have to be a nurse? And they were like, you don't. And I think that's a common thing, is people think they need to go get a degree. Just having that, that my parents are also entrepreneurs. They were like, yeah, you can follow your dreams. We know that you're going to do what it takes, because they know who I am. They know that I'm going to follow through and do what I like to do. So yeah, that was the big stepping point where I was like, I want to open a coffee shop, but I think I have to become a nurse to make money to then eventually be able to do my dream. And it really doesn't have to go that way. That was the turning point for sure.
That's super cool, man. I think probably a lot of people can relate to that. We have kind of these assumed expectations that are put on us, whether it's from parents or from culture at large or friends or whatever. You're supposed to follow a specific path. You're supposed to do, go to college, get the job, do the thing, right? But I imagine having that conversation with your parents probably just gave you so much freedom, and what a comfort it must have been to be like, okay, cool. I don't have to go down this path. I can actually do the thing that I want to do. And they kind of unlock that, sounds like, that freedom to go and do it. How cool is that? Well, thanks for sharing that, man. This has been a lot of fun, Danny. I really appreciate it. Even both times we've done this interview, the first time and then again now. Before I let you go, just one last question. How do people get in touch with you? You got your physical location. I'm sure you've got a website, social media, all that stuff. So if somebody wants to connect with Paix, how do they do it? Yeah,
so we have an Instagram, a website, and then we're here in Richmond, and we're open Tuesday through Saturday in the morning time. And then we have Instagram. It's Paix RVA, Paix RVA, and our website's the same, www.paixrva.com. So that's where you can find us.
Excellent. Well, Danny, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop by there sometime soon and get a coffee, man. I love your product.
Sounds good.
Thanks, bud. Thank you to the so many people who have listened and rated and reviewed the shows. I really appreciate all the encouragement you've sent my way, and please keep it coming. If you have questions or guests you think I should bring on, I would love to connect. You can send me an email at yetpodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram, it's yetpodcast, and please rate and review the show on Apple and Spotify. It means so much, and it helps other people connect with these great stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas. I want to read to you a review that I got recently from Brittany R. She says, "Just press play. This is a good one. Awesome podcast with very good practical tips and encouragement to get going with your goals and ideas. Thank you so much, Brittany, and thanks to you for listening to this week's episode. Until next time, keep working on your goals, and I'll see you soon.